Welcome to Shattered Reality with your hosts Kate Valentine and Fahrusha. Prepare to have your paradigms shifted and your truths questioned. And now, Shattered Reality.
Hello, listeners. Today is September 25th, 2018, and most unfortunately, for the second week in a row, Kate Valentine is unable to join us, but she hopes, I just spoke to her, and she hopes to be back with us soon. She is planning on returning as soon as physically possible for her to do so. I just drove here through a passel of rain. I mean, some of the worst rain that I ever saw. And I was brought to mind the old Murray the K intro. Welcome to all you submarine watchers out there. And anybody who's over 40 probably remembers the marvelous disc jockey Murray the K. Well, now, today on Shattered Reality podcast, in spite of the incredible rain outside here on the East Coast that almost swept my car away, I have for you a really interesting guest. He is someone whose career I have been following fairly closely for the past 15 years. He's hardworking, he's resolute, and he's extremely dedicated. He's a Canadian citizen from Manitoba. You may already have a clue as to who he is. I actually have met him twice, though he may not remember. The time that's most memorable to me was at Pat Mercatilio's Cherry Hill, New Jersey UFO twice-a-year conference. We had a really nice conversation together, he and I and Rich Dolan. It was all about exoplanets because I had with me a brand spanking new iPad with an interesting app about all the newly discovered exoplanets. Well, our guest is Grant Cameron. He began his interest in UFOs in 1975 with his observation of a recurrent UFO called Charley RedStar, which was seen in and around Carman, Manitoba, which is a town just over the border from the United States. After he saw this sighting of Charley RedStar more than once, he was kind of bitten by the UFO bug. He researched the work of the late Wilbert Smith, who headed the Canadian UFO study called Project Magnet. After that, he was led to research Dr. Eric Walker and Dr. Robert Sarbacher, who he believed were the American keepers of the UFO secret. Following this, he founded the website presidentialufo.com. He filed Freedom of Information requests, otherwise known as FOIA requests. He researched across America at local libraries of the official libraries of past presidents, finding particular interest in connections between the Clintons and the Lawrence Rockefeller UFO Initiative. Now, most recently, he had what he called a download from a non-human source about the connectedness of everything, the non-physical manifestation of UFOs, and the primacy of consciousness. I'd probably call this an enlightenment or a Kundalini awakening, but for sure, he and I are on the same page about that. So now, listeners, I hope that you're all listening very carefully because I would like to introduce Mr. Grant Cameron. Hi, Grant.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate your interest.
Well, it's sincere. I must ask you, just out of my own ego, if you remember talking to me down by Pat Mercatilio's. I know you meet thousands of people.
Yes,
you do.
I do. Yeah, I remember the conversation. Yeah.
Good. Well, that makes me feel a little bit better.
Yeah, wonderful.
So, as I had said prior to us coming on the show here, that I love your story of Charley RedStar. It's a true story, and how people didn't really pay attention outside of the sighting area, and how it began your career. But because we may have a limited time, I would like to start out from the end rather than the beginning,
Sure.
and talk with you more about what's going on now. We could talk about that mystery that you seem to be knee deep in right now, surrounding the To the Stars Academy, ATTIP, Bob Bigelow, the Skinwalker Ranch, all that stuff. And please feel free to mention your books, because I know you've written a number of them, and feel free to, sneak them in there during the show, or list them all. It's fine by me.
Yeah, okay. You're talking about To the Stars Academy. I have followed this. I sort of knew about it before. I had written a book called Managing Magic, where I had talked about Tom DeLonge and what he was doing. And this is before he went public with the big news conference, which sort of changed everything last October. And then in December, they dropped the videos and stuff. And I will have a second book coming out, which sort of updates what has happened since my first book, called Beyond Managing Magic. But the only thing I'm really following on that right now, they're doing a fairly good job in terms of getting the message out. And what I think they're trying to do, from my opinion, is they have, I made the joke, I said they fired the UFO community. They really don't care about us or what we think, because in a lot of ways, we're just sort of in the way. We ask all sorts of stupid questions and stuff. I think what they've done with this initiative with the New York Times, and I always point out, it wasn't just New York Times, it was New York Times, Washington Post, and Politico all went the same day. And this is a story that took all these news agencies a couple months to do, which means this was not an accidental disclosure. And what I think they're trying to do is they're trying to shift the attitude of the American people. Because if it happens in the New York Times, then you can believe it. It's like if you and I say it, they just, you can see people's eyes rolling back and they just sort of walk away. But if the New York Times puts it out, and I think that's what they're doing, and they're now working on this whole thing. Their latest program is the ATTIP program, which is looking at different pieces of metals. And I guess you're familiar with that.
Yes.
I have got a fair background in UFO hardware, because when I had my first sightings with the Charley RedStar thing, I tried to get the book published in the 1970s, and the local publisher said, "Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff, count me among the unbelievers." And at that point I said, okay, that's it for UFO sightings. I'm never doing another UFO sighting in my life. Total waste of time. And I went to try to find out somebody must know what I had seen. Somebody must have understood, had the answer to what I saw that night in 1975. And I chased the Canadian government through a synchronistic event that my father was a pilot for the Canadian government, and there was a radar tech who worked in his office who had a sighting, and my father wanted him. He said, "Oh, Ernie Epp wants to talk to you," and I went and talked to this guy, and it was just an ordinary sighting. And then you get these bizarre synchronicities that happen in ufology. He said, if you really want to know what's going on with UFOs, you should study what the Canadian government did in the 1950s. And I went, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, I used to work on the program." And I went, "You did?" And I was like,
Wow.
What's the chances? Because I'm 1,500 miles away from the capital where this whole thing took place. It always run out of Ottawa, Canada, which is the nation's capital. And so then I said, "You were working on it?" He said, "Yeah, I was an engineer, and the Canadians had opened up a flying saucer observatory where they had 5 different instruments, and this guy would change the paper in these sort of instruments where they were recording change in gravity, change in noise, all these different things, and they were trying to detect a flying saucer. Then they called them flying saucers or flying discs. Wilbur Smith almost never used the word UFO, and Wilbur Smith was the Canadian government engineer who ran the whole program, who was in contact with the Americans. And so this guy changed the tapes, and he would tell me about the attempts to contact this alien by the name of Alpha that they had made contact with. And during this investigation, I recorded basically as much as I could. I talked to this guy's wife in the 70s. I flew there to talk to, Wilbur Smith had died. I talked to his wife. And it was at that point I suddenly got the story from a number of the insiders. So what happened was they actually picked up an object August the 8th, 1954, coming over this station. And according to Ernie Epp, the needles went right off the paper. It was just like a major, whatever it was a major object. And from FBI documents and Air Force documents, we know that the Canadians actually predicted this would happen. There was a woman who was channeling out of just down the street from Betty Hill in Elliott, Maine.
Wow.
Who was in contact. And she'd actually predicted this would happen, I think, August the 1st. And it actually happened August the 8th, that there would be this flyby of the station. So anyway, make a long story short, they get this thing, and the government 2 days later shuts the program down and says, we didn't discover anything. There's nothing of significance here. Wilbur Smith is no longer allowed to make statements on behalf of the Canadian government. And they shut this program down. So this is 1954, and Wilbur dies in 62. So from 54 to 62, he gets a group of people, and they're working on a gravity control program. They're working on a detector. Wilbur Smith stated that they were very concerned about our nuclear weapons testing, and that when we detonate a nuclear test, there's a wave that goes down through the earth. It goes up into the air, but it also goes down through the earth.
Sure.
And you get these areas of reduced binding. So he was very concerned about these areas of reduced binding. He built a detector for this. He built a radio communication device. But the important thing when it comes to the stars thing was that Wilbur Smith was very high level in the Canadian government. He was the senior radio engineer for the Department of Transport. But when I talked to a metallurgist who had worked for them, he had a secret group of people then would work. They had no official position. These were guys. There was a guy from the Defense Research Board who was the guy who did the metal analysis. They had a guy from the Air Force, from the Navy, all these different people who are working on these different projects that they're working on, sort of secretly on their own time. And what became known was the fact that Wilbur Smith was handling material, crash saucer material from the United States. And when I talked to the metallurgist, he said to me, he said, well, don't you know what Wilbur did? And I said, well, he was a senior radio engineer. And he said, no, do you know what he did? And I said, no, not really. And he said, he ran Radio Ottawa. And I said, well, what's Radio Ottawa? And it's basically like the NSA of Canada. It's basically, they were sitting there, because he was a senior radio engineer, they had all these sort of big antennas set up, and they were trying to intercept Russian communications. And they were, like a spy thing. And so he said he had this very high security clearance because he was running Radio Ottawa. And when he was in the United States, he was negotiating when FM radio stations came in the late 50s. He was negotiating with the Americans. So he was dealing with very high-level American people, with basically officials. They were going through the Canadian embassy. And I recovered all these documents. I recovered all Wilbur Smith's documents. I got all the material that had been written, newspaper articles and stuff. And it's in the thousands of pages of material. And in that material, we actually recovered the actual correspondence through the Canadian Embassy going to what was known as the Research and Development Board. Right now, it would be known sort of as DARPA or as the Assistant Engineering for Weapons, or this sort of thing, where they built the weapon stuff. Yes. And it was headed up at times by Dr. Vannevar Bush, who, if you go back to the MJ-12 document, he was rumored to be the guy who was running the UFO program for the Americans. So anyway, what was happening was he had these communications, and they were sending material to Canada, all these different pieces of material. And Wilbur had stated that in the Pentagon, this is in the early 1950s, they actually had a little museum. One of the offices, they had various pieces of hardware inside. And then I guess they moved all the stuff to Wright-Patterson, then they moved it to Area 51, or however it all worked out. So they've collected a lot of this material. And we even have his son, James Smith, who was the oldest son, who was about, I guess, 17 when his father died, who is on record, on tape, saying, yes, I remember these packages coming. There was lots of material coming from the United States, and they would recover pieces. And so that's what I was sort of working on now with To the Stars, is there's so much crash saucer material. People cannot believe how many pieces there are of this material that are around in different people's hands. And even I think in the latest video that To the Stars put out, they have Lou Elizondo and Hal Puthoff,
Yes.
and Tom DeLonge, and they're running around with these little boxes, and they're picking up these little pieces of material from people, and they're saying they get great cooperation. And there's lots of people who have these pieces of hardware that they have collected, and they're sending them in to get them analyzed.
I just want to interrupt you for 1 second because earlier on you mentioned ATTIP program. Now, you know what it is, and I know what it is, but I'm not sure all our listeners do. And it has directly to do with what you're talking about right now. So could you just sort of, tie that knot there?
Okay, yeah. Well, To the Stars, they're working on the videos, and that was somehow declassified by the government. Whatever they mean by the government is moving this stuff out. And then they had some pieces of hardware that Lou Elizondo, who ran the ATTIP program, started to hint that they had this piece of hardware that had great implications for how UFOs the propulsion system is working, like in this big Nimitz encounter that took place in 2004. So what they did as a program is through Hal Puthoff, who's a guy who's got expertise to analyze this type of material. They put out sort of an alert to people: if you've got any UFO hardware that you've got, we can analyze it. And so what they do is they put a big insurance program on the piece of material so that if it disappears, the person will get $1 million or whatever the figure is, I don't know, to encourage people to hand over the material. And they can do this material and analyze this material, and they believe that it will lead to discovering what the propulsion system is. Mm-hmm. I maintain that it may do that, but I insist that all it's going to do is the same as UFO sightings. UFO sightings, you can collect them until the cows come home, and all it's going to do in the end is prove, there's probably somebody coming from someplace else, and these UFO videos and people's reports, it indicates something flying around in the sky and it's not ours. But it does not tell you anything. It doesn't tell you where they're from, what they're doing here. None of that's answered. The same with the metal. If there's one of the main pieces that Linda Howe got through Art Bell, who used to run the Coast to Coast show in 1996. Sure. And this is this layered piece of bismuth magnesium. And so this is a piece that's layered very, very thin. We can't produce this even today. And this is one of the pieces that they were sort of floating around that had this great implications. But I maintain that it's going to be the same thing. You're going to say, this piece of material is very, very strange. We didn't make this material, and it's probably from someplace else. But again, all it does is it's a dead end. It just says to you, yes, there's something going on. We didn't make this material. We're probably being visited from somewhere. And that's why I always go to the fact that I spend most of my time now with experiencers, because we have, if you're familiar with the Edgar Mitchell
absolutely
Free Foundation.
Yes, we've had Ray Hernandez on, and we've had a few of the other people on.
Yeah. So people will say, well, it's just anecdotal stories or whatever, but it's better than metal, and it's better than UFO sighting reports. In fact, it's the same thing, because you can have sightings and it's all anecdotal stuff as well. You saw a sighting and you claim you saw this.
And people do embroider a little bit, I would say, sometimes. Being an experiencer myself, I would still say people sometimes enhance their experiences a little bit.
So I say that you take the 4,000 people, and I don't care, give them lie detector tests, do whatever you got to do to verify their story to see who's telling the truth, who's not telling the truth. But don't ignore these people. These are the people that have the answer. These are the people who are interacting with the intelligence behind the phenomena. And they, unlike the government, won't tell you what's going on. But these experiencers will tell you exactly what their experience is. And if because you're probably familiar with the free data.
I'm very familiar with
once you start looking at the data, you have these very, very direct numbers that are just staggering. Like, 50% of all people claim that they have been healed. They or someone in their family has been healed. 40% claim they're able to heal people. 42% claim that they have got mathematical, scientific, or technical material in their head that they did not learn in school. 40% say at some point during their experience they knew the answer to everything in the universe. And these are big numbers. 37% claim they've had a near-death experience. And you look at these numbers and you say, this is where the answers are going to be. You've got to do this sort of thing, or how many have paranormal experiences, how many can channel. There's all these bizarre things, and that's where I think it goes.
I I largely agree with you, very largely agree with you, because as I said, I am an experiencer myself, and we've had like 5 people on, at least from free, over the course of the last several years. I would say I've got to stick in 1 or 2 things there, Grant. First thing about the metals. The metals are interesting to me primarily because of the possible isotopes that are not found on Earth. And the only way I could see, if you're thinking nuts and bolts, and I'm not sure that this phenomena is all one thing, but and I'm not generally thinking nuts and bolts, but if you are thinking nuts and bolts and you find these isotopes from somewhere else, maybe there's a place that you can identify with a spectrograph of some sort if this isotope is present on Zeta Reticuli or something. And then you might be able to extrapolate something from that. But if it's not nuts and bolts, and most of it probably isn't, then certainly the experiencer route is better.
Yeah. But if you're looking at, spectrographic analysis of other planets, that's still going to be a ways off. We're pretty far from that. So it's a long way. And you do have the thing, because Jacques Vallée did the lecture of something that sort of got me down another road. And he talks about the isotopes. So you have the ones with the isotopes are completely out of the range of anything we have on Earth. And he talks about extruded metals. So there's 3 different types of metals, I think, that are looking at. So you're looking at UFO hardware that's crashed, say Roswell or Del Rio or any of the famous crashes that supposedly happened. You got that. Then you've got the stuff that they did, the analysis on the implants from Roger Leir, because Big Bob Bigelow put a lot of that money into Roger Leir. So they've got the analysis of all that stuff. So that's your second type of metal. And then the third type of metal is these extruded metals. And this is the one that really made me come up almost with a whole new theory. And my theory, because I hate acronyms, so I hate this ATTIP. I can't even remember what it represents. It's some bizarre bunch of words or whatever. So they use this acronym, and so I made my own acronym. It's TUTOW, TTOW, the theory of wow, and it links into this whole thing about the extruded metals. So you have a number of these cases, and I'm giving a lecture this weekend in Vancouver, in 100 Mile House outside of Vancouver, Canada, and I'm giving it in Irvine, California next week, and I'm going to go through this whole theory. And what I'm sort of proposing is that when it comes to what the intelligence behind the phenomena may be doing, it's really not doing anything except making us go, wow, because it's not really landing on the White House lawn and telling us what's going on. It's dropping these little breadcrumbs. And one of the ones is that I don't think you can define any other way except by this theory, is this thing about extruded metals. And there's a lot of this stuff. Jacques Vallée has a number of them in his lecture. And what this is you have a lot of cases. You'll have like 1947. You have this UFOs flying along, and all of a sudden it looks like it's going to crash. Almost like the idea with a bird with a broken wing and is trying to get you away from the nest. It gets your attention. This UFO is flipping around, and everybody's watching it. And holy cow, it's going to crash! And all of a sudden it sort of stabilizes and shoots out this metal, and then flies away.
Slag. You're talking about slag.
They used to call it slag. Yeah. And for many years, people collected this material, and everybody'd say, oh, it's just slag. It's just from some refinery. The person's making it up or whatever. But now we have the technical abilities. And I guess whether it's Hal Puthoff or somebody's put some money into this. So now they can analyze this kind of stuff. And that's where the ATTIP program is going, is that they have the sophistication to actually analyze the isotopes and do this stuff that you couldn't do in the 1947 and stuff. So there's a number, and I'm going to go through a number of these this weekend in my lecture, and where, UFO over Ohio is flying along, and they hear this big thud, this noise, and they're wondering what's going on, and they go looking around, and here's this molten metal, and it's shooting this molten metal. So why would a UFO? I mean, do they come across the galaxy to shoot out molten metal? Is that part of the propulsion system? They have problems, they shoot it out, or are they doing this just to make us go, wow? They're dropping like a breadcrumb, and they've done it so many times with this extruded metal. And the people pick it up and they go, wow, and they keep this material. And now we're in this situation where we're starting to analyze this kind of stuff. They even have a very recent one that happened with an orb. description of an orb. I think it's 11 feet in the air. It's flying across this driveway, and it's dripping metal onto the driveway. Ooh. So, of course, the witness goes and picks up this metal, puts it in a little thing, and they're going to analyze this. So to me, this is this thing where it's like the way I sort of categorize it in my lecture. So I got grade 1. And it's like, maybe this is what's going on. On Zeta Reticuli, they have all these science fair projects. And you've got the natives on Earth. And we have to get across the message without going in there and saying, we're here to bring you freedom, democracy, Jesus, and McDonald's. We're here to tell you what's going on. They do this indirect thing where they just sort of make you think. They just make you wonder. Because the number one grade 1 lesson might be science fair project. So the kids' Zeta Reticuli grade 1 project is, we have to get a message to the Earth. Your grade 1, what you want to do. And they say, let's put lights on crafts and let's fly crafts around. Because the whole deal is that if you're flying around, we don't have lights on our planes, except for navigation lights, but we don't have lights on our plane. And UFOs, people always used to think, when I had my first sighting in 75, there's a random event. And in 1975, if you said, I've seen 2 UFOs, they would totally write you off. Nobody sees 2 UFOs. It's just a random event. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time, right place at the right time, and you saw this UFO flying by to go pick up beer or whatever it's doing. And what you start to see is that when you look at all the different sightings, 1890s, it was wooden ships with propellers flying around. Then it turned into the Foo Fighters, which are on the edges of the planes, these little balls of light. Then they go away. Then the green fireballs come, and they're over the nuclear and the military stuff of the late 1940s. And then they go away. And then comes the Adamski crafts, and then they go away. And then you have, this 1 mile wide craft flying over Phoenix, Arizona. Do they need a craft that's 1 mile across? And if you start looking at the UFO sightings, almost all the UFOs are different. They got different lights on them. John Lennon's had big, huge bulbs on the side of this thing flashing off, on, a red light on top. And I say, do you really need big light bulbs around the side of your craft to fly through interstellar space? No, it's all just a game. They're just going, whoa, take a look at this. And they're doing this breadcrumb thing. So grade 1 would be sort of the breadcrumb thing. Then you have these beings that come down. They do the screen imaging thing. They sort of interact with some people. They meet with Adamski, and then they disappear. The humanoid types, and then you have the gray start in 1961, and you start seeing these patterns, and that's where it starts to fit in. That you see the metal, and you go, I mean, if these are that sophisticated to come across the universe, and that many of them, not only do they crash, but they break into little tiny pieces that people can pick up. What's going on? And I start to think that no, it's all imaging, it's all messages. So with the To the Stars thing, I think it's sort of like a dead end in terms of where you're going to go. And in the higher lessons, the higher grades, what they're doing is they're coming in, they're doing this direct sort of the abduction thing, where they pick up people, they give the messages, and you get these sort of patterns, and these people start to carry the message. And in maybe 10 years ago, like, nobody would really listen to an experiencer. It was like, you're kind of crazy, whatever. But they're almost like the gays coming out of the closet in the 1960s. They're sort of putting groups together. You're starting to see this data that starts to fit an explanation that there is something here. We should look at these people. And then with myself, like, I've had actually 2 real major download experiences. I've had a number, and the way I do it, I say that there's different ways to do this. And people will use like drumming, meditation, hypnosis, a brain injury. And what happens is, I describe it as, and the analogy I use, it's like you're in the ocean. It's all one thing. It's all water. And at the top of the ocean, you have the light. And the farther you're down into the water, the darker it gets. And we're right at the bottom. We're in this darkness. And at some point, whether you're zoning out, as I did during this Colin Andrew lecture in 2012 when I had the download experience, I sort of zoned out and I sort of floated up into higher water where I could see more. And then this stuff came into my head and I floated back down. And I had another one about 2 years ago, which was a lot more involved. It involved 24 different items of a download experience. So I picked that up, and that's the thing. That's the thing that I think is important to me, because once I had mine, I said in 2012, before I had the download experience, I was the nuts and bolts guy. I was believed that the president of the United States had the answer. He knows what's going on. I still believe the president knows what's going on. And so that's where I was going. And when I had that experience, it came with absolute certainty. And I don't know if you've had this kind of experience, but people who report these moments of inspiration, and a lot of them, like Einstein's prime example, Einstein's theory of relativity came in a dream that he had, where he was on this toboggan, he's going the speed of light, And he's quoted as saying, I knew I had to understand that dream. In fact, I would say that my entire career was based upon a meditation on a dream. So when you have these download experiences, you know this is important.
Yes,
there was no doubt in
absolutely.
my mind that this is the way it was. The same in this one that I had 2 years ago that had 24 things. It was like, and it was very cold. I was walking along, and that's the way I do it. I can walk long distances, and I'm just sort of thinking, and you sort of zone out, and then suddenly it starts coming in your head. So I was on a walk.
A walking meditation, yes, indeed.
Yeah. So I'm about 2 miles away from my home, and this starts to come into my head, these 24 things. And that one, I'll just give you a brief thing because it's pretty involved. But it basically said to me, the first one was consciousness, non-local consciousness is what it's all about. Because in 75, when I had this experience and nobody would publish the book, I said, all I'm interested in is what's going on. Somebody must know what my experience was about. What did I see? And when I got that thing, it was like, this is the answer you've been looking for. It's all consciousness. It's all non-local consciousness. Everything is one. So the next, this download experience said, you're looking at the world, and there's if this versus that. And what is happening is you've got to get all the assumptions right. It's like doing a mathematical equation. If in step 2 you add instead of subtracting, you can do all the research you want. You are going to get the wrong answer. You have to get all the assumptions right. So the one assumption would be, is the world, this goes back to my 2012 one, is the world made out of nuts and bolts? Is it made out of little tiny physical particles?
No.
That may be one world. So that's one world. You can build this whole world view around that sort of thing. But this is the download, is it nuts and bolts or is it consciousness? If it's consciousness, then it's a completely different world. You have to redo everything, go through all your assumptions again because you've got a basic assumption wrong. So that was the one. The other one is the the message that experiencers get. 54% of all people say that they're talked to about oneness. I say that is the key message that they're trying to get across, is this thing that everything is alive, everything's connected, everything's one, they are us, we are them, and this whole concept. And the way we have it in this world, even Donald Trump's speech today, in the UN, Donald Trump says he's in favor of patriotism rather than globalism. So it's this idea of separation, where we separate, you're separate from me, and then there's good guys and bad guys. Animals are just objects, we can kill animals, and it's this separation thing that when you get separation, it's a completely different world.
Yes.
Or based upon the world of oneness. If you believe everything's one, that you are I am the aliens, I am everything, or, even with ayahuasca experiences, people will describe Sting, the famous musician, said, yes, he does the ayahuasca and he suddenly realizes his ego is crushed and everything around him was alive and conscious. And that, I think, is the message they're trying to get across. So I got these different things. Or the other one, I'll give you an example in this 24 things. One was one life or multiple lives. So we've always made the assumption it's one life. We only live one time. But if reincarnation, if it's multiple lives, everything changes, especially when it comes to abduction experiences, that people say, oh, they're abducted, it's against their will or whatever. And then you regress people back, like Chris Bledsoe, famous experiencer, in his regression. It was done by the associate of John Mack, Michael O'Connor. He said, when did you first meet these people? And Chris said, they have been with me since before I was born. Okay. And you start talking to experiencers, and a lot of them, when you regress them back, Kathy Martin said she really, didn't know whether this is true. So she got a regression, and she got regressed back to when she was born. And she said, I was really shocked to hear myself say, yes, I agreed to do that. I agreed to come in to do this. So if it's multiple lives, then everything that happens to you in your life is really not random. It's things that you're choosing to do to learn lessons. And so you get another thing is the world random or is it not random? If you're, say, an experiencer and you predict that I'm going to have a car accident in 3 days, the world is a lot less random than you think it is. We assume the whole world's random. We build our whole world view on this randomness thing. Maybe it's not random at all. And that was these things. There's 24 things. Is it this or is it that? Is it this or that? And so I'm sort of putting these together now, and I'm doing a presentation online that will be at my White House UFO YouTube channel, where I'm going to go through about 12 or 13 of these things that came into my head. And that's where I'm at now. It's more like a philosophical look at the whole thing. What does it really mean? Because people will get into, like, for example, with the To the Stars or whatever it is. It's like, well, when are we going to get disclosure? When is the government going to, tell us? And basically, it's like, when are they going to tell me what I believe is true? And basically, when it comes down, and I always end my lectures with this, when it comes down to it, it really has nothing to do with the government. It's like, are you going to get up and do something finally if the government discloses? What the government does has nothing to do with you. It's what are you? It's multiple lives, you came into this world to do something. You're going to leave this world. They're going to ask you, how did you make out? Because you put all the players, you set up the whole stage and arranged all this thing to learn whatever lessons. And they're going to say, how did you make out? And you can't bring up Hillary Clinton. You can't bring up the government. You can't bring up the dog ate my homework. You can't bring up any of this kind of stuff. It basically comes down to, I came into this life. I have something that I plan to do. And am I doing it? And that's all we have to really worry about, that we're sort of externally motivated, which I guess would be one of the other things. Are you internally motivated or externally motivated?
I think that the the call to the UFO area is something that is coming to certain people. I had witnessed UFOs when I was in my teens, and had some, not abduction, but experiencer situations with other beings when I was in my 20s. And I kind of ran away from it because it frightened me. But then, around 15 years ago, I was suddenly reawoken and I had to do something more with it. Thus, here I am on this show, basically, which involves consciousness and UFOs and past lives and NDEs and all that sort of thing. But in the interim, I felt like I too was given a gift, which was the ability to do readings for people, which I have been doing ever since my teens, ever since around the time of my first UFO sighting. So
yeah, and that's the thing, is I always ask experiencers, one of my first questions when they say an experiencer, I always say, do you believe you have a mission? And almost everybody will say, yeah, I think, like a lot of people say, I think I do. I don't know what it is. And some people like you have sort of figured it out. And that's where I'm saying is that in the end, if you're way ahead of the crowd, if you suddenly realize that you have some sort of thing that you're supposed to do, that's where it doesn't become random, where you're chosen to do something, you come in. And a lot of people believe it's sort of like, I'm a victim, this happened to me, and I really don't want to be a part of this. And it comes down to taking personal responsibility for where you're at. And the experiencers have much more of the answers, I think, in terms of even Ray Hernandez. And you get these bizarre synchronicities where it shows the world isn't really random. Ray Hernandez, he has his first experience where he has the dog. You know his dog story? Where his wife,
I do.
Yeah, so this happens on March the 4th or 5th or something, 2012. My download experience happened a week before that.
Wow.
Chris Bledsoe's first encounter with the Shining Lady happened within days. And I always tell Ray, I said, Ray, I don't think it's accidental. In fact, the other one that Ray talks about, he has this thing where he goes outside the house. His wife sees this thing, and you remember the story. He goes and he's standing outside the house, and he hasn't seen anything yet, and he's waiting for this guy to drop off these papers. He's an IRS attorney, and he said, "Well, I think I'll try it. I want to see the big ship that has the stained glass windows that my wife saw." And really, nothing happens. And 15 minutes later, just before this guy arrives, suddenly there's this thing. He says looks like Wembley Stadium over the next door neighbor's house, and he suddenly realizes this thing's got consciousness because I actually brought this thing in. And so he gets into this thing, and Ray, I mean, he was only sleeping, I think, 2 hours a day at the time. He was reading everything he could find on quantum physics and, UFOs and stuff. And he contacted me on the internet because I'd started to do consciousness lectures. And so I said, well, I'm coming to Florida. I'm coming to Sebring, Florida. I'm going to lecture on consciousness. Why don't you come down? We'll have a talk. So he comes to that lecture. I give my consciousness lecture. He and his wife tell their story for the first time in this experiencer meeting that they have there. And a couple days later, after my consciousness lecture, he leaves. That's when he has the download experience on the Miami freeway, where he's taken there, and it's the wheel. It's the whole wheel where, there's quantum physics, there's near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, there's UFOs, and in the middle of the wheel is consciousness. And They show him this wheel. And so you start to see all this stuff, because it's the same message I had. I wrote a book called Inspired, The Paranormal World of Creativity. And I wrote that. It's the same thing. So I go through different chapters. So a chapter on people who got downloads and inspirations and near-death experiences, experiences in music, in art, in inventions, with head injuries, all these different things. And it's all the same thing. And that's basically what it comes down to, is it's a conscious world. It's not a nuts and bolts world. It's a conscious world. And when you understand that and you realize everything is connected, everything is linked together, and that the primary building block, the ground of being, is consciousness. Once you understand that, you start to make ground. And I say, and I will repeat 100 times if I'm allowed to in a lecture, unless you understand consciousness and realize its implications for the UFO phenomena, you will never, ever understand what's going on, because it has so much to do with what's going on. This is really not a nuts and bolts thing like people think it is. We don't know what we're up against. I've had experiencers who have actually said to the beings, "Are you an alien?" I don't know if you've ever interviewed Sherry Wilde. She was one. She said to them, are you actually an alien? And he said, "No, I'm not." And she said, "Well, why do you come dressed as this ugly gray looking thing?" And he said, "Ugly gray thing? You ever looked at yourself in the mirror?" Because she's got she's got big teeth. She says, "You ever looked at yourself in the mirror? When you smile, we think you're going to eat us." And you get these people getting these indications that maybe it's like, where does the screen imaging start and the alien ends? Or you have an alien that turns into a ball of light and disappears. Well, is it a ball of light or is it an alien? And if it's a ball of light, does it eat bacon, eggs, toast, and coffee in the morning? And you start getting these cross that they're in sort of another world, almost like Bashar, the great channeler, said.
Yes.
We come to you in your dreams, because now you're in our world. So they're in this world higher up in the water, closer to the light. They know more, they can see more, and they come in and they can move back. And we think we're stuck in this physical world. That's all there is. And that's where you have to I think people have to realize that this consciousness thing is the link. It is the key to put this whole thing together. And that's why I'm so happy that Ray put this. He's a fantastic guy in terms of, I don't know if he sleeps or not, but he put out this book called Beyond UFOs. And
800 pages, right?
Yeah, and it's all about consciousness. And that's what I said. This is the story. They read this whole book, and John Alexander does an article in there, and Rudy Shield, and all these people. In fact, a couple of the authors are actually dead now that, they wrote the articles and they're now in there. But it's all about this consciousness link, and that's where we have to go. So it's kind of, candy to watch the, the hardware stuff with the recovering metals, or look at the latest UFO video or whatever. But in terms of getting answers, you get the situation where, for example, 40% of all experiencers say at one point they knew the answer to everything in the universe, or 22% of them say they knew the answer to everything about themselves that ever existed. If somebody is given access to the answer to everything in the universe, then the aliens have opened this thing up. They have allowed you, and I would say it's higher consciousness. It's like all the answers are there, and it's a matter of tapping into the thing. And that's what we have to learn, is that we're just stuck in this world with a bunch of bad beliefs and a bunch of bad assumptions, and we're sort of like just watching the next video and the next thing, and that people like Ray and the Free Organization, I believe, are on the right track. And it all happened at the same time. His story started basically the same time as mine started. There's this woman,
Bettina Aguilera, was running for Congress in Florida for the GOPs. She lost the primary, but she was actually, the Miami Herald actually backed her. She was the most qualified candidate, and she's had 6 experiences where she was taken to another planet. So I had a number of conversations with her, and one of the things she brought up was the fact that one of her major first experiences happened exactly the same day as Travis Walton was abducted. Travis Walton's experiences happened exactly the same time as, if you remember, in 1975, the famous NORAD experiences. So you have UFOs inside the nuclear weapons storage areas at Loring Air Force Base, Word Sprint Air Force Base, Minot Air Force Base, Malmstrom Air Force Base. That happened exactly the same time as Travis Walton. So you get these bizarre synchronicities, and mine was 75. Bud Hopkins, and this is an example that shows that it's almost like they're dropping little crumbs. 1975 is when Bud Hopkins started his abduction research, and the way it starts is very bizarre. He has a sighting in 1964, and when you hear him describe that sighting, you go, this guy's an experiencer. There's no way. This thing's hanging above him, above the car, plain daylight, saucer just sitting there, sort of just, he's motivated to go read UFO books. And in 75, the guy who sells him his liquor at the corner store says, I had this weird experience the other night. I was going along the road, and there was this flying saucer. It was about 100 feet from the road, and there was these aliens outside the craft with little shovels, and they were digging holes. And it's like, really? So Bud, of course, gets obsessed with this, and he goes to the area, and he finds these 15 holes, 5 inches deep. And then he goes and talks to a guy. There was a night watchman at an apartment complex or something that would have been able to see this field. And the guy said, yeah, I saw this thing going on the other night. And Bud starts this whole thing.
Yes.
So is it random that Bud just suddenly got into this? And you can see people getting sort of dragged in. It's like you see a UFO, and you always have these stories where people see a UFO and then they get into research and then they quit. And then, we always had this joke years ago already. We said, nah, they quit. Yeah, don't worry. They'll be back. Nobody leaves. Everybody comes back.
Yes.
You get depressed for a while and you pull out, but you always come back. It's like the hook is in you and you can't let it go. And that's with me. I mean, my friends were with me in 1975. They went on with their life. I fell off the edge of the earth. I mean, I could not believe what I'd seen. I just basically gave up everything, and I've sort of been chasing this thing. And there was a 10-year period where I didn't do anything. But I'm as obsessed with the thing as I ever was.
Yes, and as I was saying to you briefly, in 2012, in that same time period, I saw a huge fireball fly over my head. And it was like this bright green, and it seemed to be like molten. And it was what they call February fireballs that don't follow the seemingly the rules of physics the way regular meteor showers do. They're huge. They're seen by a lot of people, and I thought it had fallen down on a hill nearby where I was watching it, and I was waiting for some kind of explosion, but apparently people saw it all the way from Scandinavia all the way to like West Virginia was basically the trajectory of the thing. And it was a real wake-up call for me, but I in my original sighting and my connection with a being who was a tall, blonde or sort of Nordic type being, like an angel without wings kind of being, until the time that I came back into the field, so to speak, around 2004. It was a number of years in between. But like you said, you get bitten at one point and you could drop out for a while. I dropped out slightly because of fear and slightly because life took me in a different direction. I had to make money and live and do all those good things.
Yeah. And the interesting side note there is that Bettina, her beings were like yours. That's what she's describing. Human type beings. In fact, she says she's pretty convinced they're the same ones that are described in this whole story about the Pentagon, the Thor thing at the Pentagon, all that sort of stuff. I actually put her in contact with the guy who's the major researcher who's doing the movie on it. She's just sort of fascinating. She's actually doing a book now. So here's this woman who, put her whole career on the line and realized this could backfire, when running for Congress and stuff like that. And she's still not really out there, but she is doing a book on her experience. So you can see people get motivated, and it's like, is this random that these people are doing this, or are we sort of inspired to do this, given some little breadcrumb that sort of wakens you up? It's almost like if you're an experiencer, it's usually you're a lifer. It happens your entire life, but there comes a period of time, like in Chris Bledsoe, 2007 in January, where they sort of wake you up to say, okay, now it's time for you to remember. And suddenly you have an experience, and suddenly it all comes flooding back into your head, and you're off on your little mission, whatever your mission is.
Indeed. Well, I have a few questions and kind of sort of like a conversation I'd like to have with you about a few of these things. And on this show, we have dealt with people who were abducted, but we've also dealt with parapsychologists and people who are involved from that angle. Now, in parapsychology and in physics, to an extent, there are people like at the Paralab, the former Paralab, who were physicists who have come into this through the back door, like Dr. Robert John, recently deceased. But in the end, what the question ends up being. There are people who are physicalists, that are materialists, and then there are people who are, like you and I, largely consciousness people who believe that consciousness is primary. And so there's always this tension between the two. However, if you go all the way down to the bottom of things, even in terms of particles, you can discover that, weigh an electron, it doesn't weigh anything. Weigh a proton, cut it up into pieces, it doesn't weigh anything because it's really energy. When you get to that, then the next step, I guess, beyond energy is totally non-physical stuff. But since matter and energy seem to be totally, interchangeable, that's, I guess, the first step in this direction. However, what I wanted...
when I lecture on that, I usually talk about the famous dual slit experiment. When I lecture about this, I talk about the sort of the primary element of consciousness, that when you have the dual slit experiment, it's a quantum wave. When you try to make a measurement, when you bring an observer in, then it turns to a particle. And so as Wheeler, who won the Nobel Prize for physics, and he was the guy who came up with dark holes and wormholes and all those theories, said it's a participatory universe, that consciousness forces the wave to turn into a particle. And it also proves to me that particles at the quantum wave is actually conscious, because it knows when there's an observer and it knows when there's not an observer. When there's an observer, it'll turn to a particle. When there's no observer, it'll stay as a wave. The same as the other big experiment is the entangled particle experiment, where you send a particle in one direction, an entangled particle, and another one in the other direction, say a photon or whatever, and you just change its spin. You change the one spin, the other one could be on the other side of the galaxy, and it will change its spin.
Yes.
Which sort of throws this whole thing about time and space out of maybe we've got that all wrong as well. And I say, well, that also proves that the photon is conscious, because it knows when you're fooling around with its buddy. When you change its buddy's spin, it immediately changes. So it knows what the other side is doing. And that's this whole thing, that everything is conscious right down to that level. And so when it comes to the sort of the battle of sort of the physicalists who are in the field and who are still trying to hedge it as sort of a material thing, that consciousness, the brain creates this consciousness rather than the other way around. I say basically it comes down, I say the UFO cover-up is got nothing to do with the government. The government would disclose if you would give them the opening to do it. I'd say the media really doesn't. If it's a big story, they'll run the story. The key element to the cover-up is the scientific community. So I was looking it up the other day, and to go to Harvard or to go to MIT, it's like $46,000 a year. So if you go to Harvard or MIT for 4 years and you spend all this money, plus the amount of money it takes you to live there, whatever, and then suddenly someone says to you everything you learned at school is total nonsense, you're going to fight back, because that's I call it the secular Sunday school. I mean, you've been embedded with an idea that everything is physical, and these professors that you sort of held up to be really smart guys told you this, and it's very hard. You can see this in politics, that people just become more embedded when you start arguing politics, whether it's one side or the other, on their view.
Yes.
That very few people ever change. It's almost like, I think Max Planck, who was one of the key guys for quantum physics, said, science advances one funeral at a time. And I think the UFO community is the same thing. And that's why I think it was so important what To the Stars did. And I think it was Jim Semivan who set this thing up, these three newspapers to all go the same day. And what you're trying to do is if you're a Republican or a Democrat, you don't go after the other side's voters, because they ain't voting for you. What you do is you go after the swing voters. So you may have a 10% or 20% part of the American population who really don't have any vested interest in UFOs. They really don't know. Those are the people you're trying to swing, the swing voters. Just move those people, gradually move them farther and farther. And it's like the whole consciousness thing, where you get to a certain point in a consciousness thing where it suddenly flips, where it's like, I always say, like, when did African Americans get their right? And when did gay rights suddenly get acknowledged? And people go, I don't know when it was, 15 years, 20 years. It's just going to sort of happen, and people just sort of accept it. And then they're going to say, well,
a culturization, sort of.
People want this thing where somebody's going to stand up and do it. But that's really not the way it works. The government never leads. They just follow. and it's coming from the bottom. And that's what the intelligence behind the phenomena is doing, is they're coming from the bottom up. They're shifting consciousness. They don't deal with the government. They're dealing with people one at a time, and these messages are coming, and the people tell your stories. And that's why they tell these bizarre stories. That's why you have these bizarre incidents that happen to you, where all they want you to do is go and tell your story to 100 people. That's why they abducted Travis Walton, I believe, for 5 days, because they went, wow, if we abduct somebody for 5 days, man, that thing will be on the front page. And Travis, to this day, is still the most famous lecturer there is. Everybody wants him. Every weekend he's doing something. And if he'd only been taken for 2 hours, you never heard of Travis Walton. So they're doing this kind of stuff. Or Chris Bledsoe. Chris Bledsoe, the Warner Brothers wants to do the movie on his story. Very bizarre story. And they say, we'd like a sign. Can you get them to give us a sign? And Chris says, oh, I guess so. And he meditates or prayers or whatever he does. And the very next day, the tree starts to burn. And this tree is burning 3 times in 6 hours. And they're trying to put this tree on the inside of the tree, which had half fallen down, had a UFO ring on it underneath it years before, and half the tree had died. And then suddenly it's on fire, and the branches, there's a hole through the top, and the fire's coming out the top of the trees. And they go back to the scriptwriters at Warner Brothers, and they say, you know what happened last night? This weird thing, this tree kept burning. We stuck the hose in there, and we put it out, and then we'd start fire on it. And they said, thank you, that's the sign we wanted. And that's why I always said, that's what they want to do. They're just doing this weird thing.
The wow
So
factor.
when I'm with Chris Bledsoe, where I'm with Chris Bledsoe in 2013, and I really don't know him. I'm just going past his place. I say, Chris, can I stop by and see you? I want to see this burning tree. And I'm taking pictures of the burning tree, and we're in his house, and we're playing on the computer, and his wife is gone. His kids are all like university age kids. They're all gone. We're sitting there by ourselves, and we're playing on Facebook. And, I'm just ready to go to Florida to lecture, where I would meet Ray. And then I said to him, or suddenly I hear him say, what are you guys doing back in the house? And I look, and he's got 3 dogs, a big, huge black lab, a medium-sized dog, and this little tiny chihuahua, and they're standing in the middle of the living room. And he goes, how are you back in the house? And we go, and the front door's wide open. So he puts the dogs back outside, and I leave, and then I get to Florida, and he's got an email. He said, you know what? Happened 2 more times after you left. I went back in the house, and then suddenly the dogs are back in the house, and I go, and the front door's wide open. And then I go in the bathroom, I put the dogs outside, go in the bathroom, come out, and the dogs are back in the house again. The front door's wide open. And I thought, whatever, you left the door open. I mean, it didn't mean anything to me. So when I come back, I'm going back to Washington, D.C. to drop off a rent-a-car. I want to take some more pictures of the tree, and he's got very, very bizarre stories. He takes you around, shows you all these different things that happened. And it's like a story that Warner Brothers was going to throw $80 million at this story. It was just such a bizarre story. And so I'm taking pictures, and this happens within 5 minutes after I get there.
Wow.
Suddenly, this thing with the dog. So he's sitting there and says, let's go in the house. And Nellie, who's the big black lab, is right behind us, lying on the grass behind us. It's completely quiet. And we go in the house, and I'm on the left, Chris is on the right, and the dog comes on my left side. And I hear Chris go, Nellie, what happened to you? And I look, and this blood is shooting out the dog's neck, like an artery got hit, like a water fountain. It's shooting up on the walls and the floor and stuff. And I go, and when they were letting the dogs out of the front door, I went, you left the door open. I went, wow, this is weird. I go run into the car, I get the camera, I'm taking these pictures. And then Chris and I had this sort of a debate. And I said to Chris, you know what I think they're doing? They burnt the tree. They want a movie. They want this story out. They want you to tell the story. And that's why they did. And he said, no, I thought it was the shadow people. And I said, no, I was. And what happened was, to me, it was like, you're not impressed with us letting the dogs out the front door? Watch this. And when I looked, my pants, the dog came on my side, the side of my pants. Like, how long does it take a dog to run by you? Like a quarter of a second?
Right.
My pants looked like the dog had been standing there for 5 minutes. There's blood up and down the side of my pants. Chris puts his hand on the dog. He's good. The dog is lying down, completely calm, takes the rag up, which is all full of blood. The dog runs off, and they look for a wound. They could not find any wound on the dog. And it's those kind of bizarre things.
And the dog was okay, right? The dog was okay.
The dog was okay.
That's what we all want to hear.
And that's the whole thing. Yeah, and that's the whole thing, is that they're doing these bizarre things, because I tell this story every chance I get. And then he said, no, I don't think that's what it was. And then a couple weeks later, he phones, he says, you still got those photographs you were taking? Warner Brothers would like to see the photographs. So whenever they do this story, whenever this story comes out, this is going to be one of the stories. And that's what they do. They burn the tree. They do the thing. Like his first night when he had the sighting, there was 14 UFOs. People don't realize how impressive this story was. There was aliens all over the place. There was one chasing the truck. His son was pinned down on the bush by these 2-3 foot aliens with the red eyes. And when he gets home, these beings are in the bush, and he goes out there, and then there's one, a tall 7-foot bluish green being that comes up to the window. It was the most bizarre thing. Like, why would you do this? Like, it was almost like they want this story told. It was just so bizarre. 8 or 9 UFOs moving like a constellation across the sky as this thing starts. And here's this guy who doesn't really believe anything. He's a Pentecostal deacon, has no interest in UFOs, is suddenly thrust into the story with all these contractors. There's 5 witnesses. And it's a story where Warner Brothers looks at it and says, boy, we left it. It was, in fact, it was Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson wanted to play the lead role.
Cool.
He wanted to play Chris Bledsoe in this movie, and they were going to have Julia Roberts in the movie. And that's what I think they're doing. They're doing this kind of thing where they're going, wow, tell this story. And the more people hear it, it's almost like now you can talk to someone on the street and they may not believe you, but not going to call you crazy anymore. The consciousness has shifted. And I think this is what they're doing. They're shifting consciousness. The same as that's what I believe Through the Stars is doing. They're shifting consciousness. They're not trying to impress anybody. They're not trying to prove anything. In the end, they're just moving that spectrum over. So more and more people are accustomed to the fact that when it comes out, people won't be surprised. And there was even a guy by the name of Kit Green who's on Through the Stars. He works with the experiencers. He does the brain scans on the experiencers. They talk about the experiencers all have this antenna that you're tapped into whatever this phenomena is. They call it an antenna. And so Kit Green tells a story. He's interviewed this a number of years ago for a book called, I can't remember the book, but it was a guy who believed it was all government disinformation type stuff. And Kit Green says to him, he was talking about Serpo, and he said, no, don't throw that story out. He said, there's classified material in there. And then he said, what would you do if you had to get this story? What would you do? It's fine to sit on the sidelines and say the government should do this, the government should do that. But what happens if you're the government and you have to do something about this? He said, well, you put out all sorts of memes about the reptilians, you're eating your kids and all this kind of stuff. And then if something comes out, if they suddenly release the story, it's just going to be, we're being visited for some whatever reason by things. And the people will immediately go, well, they're eating our kids? And they go, no, they're not eating the kids. And everybody go, well, then what's the big deal? What's the big deal? And that's what they're doing. I think the government's doing the same acclimatization. And I've written a number of books about this, about the government gradually leaking these stories that are sort of gradually putting out the message of what they're doing.
I have one big question for you, and I want to have a moment to just pose it out for you.
Sure.
And that is that, you and I, and perhaps many of our readers, may agree that consciousness is primary, and not get any argument. You won't get any argument from me about that. However, just because everything is connected, and I believe it is, I'm still not totally convinced that all the different experiences, and I'm not talking about past life experiences versus UFO experiences. I'm talking about experiences, quote unquote, of the others. Now, for the purposes of this discussion, I would choose to call them entities, whether they're aliens, whether they're angels, whether they're, just non-corporeal beings floating in the atmosphere. We don't know. In fact, we really don't know. But you get stuff going on like was at the Skinwalker Ranch there, where animals were mutilated, and other places in the Uinta Basin and other places around the world where animals are mutilated, where cats are cut in half. And like take the missing 411 situation. People go missing. The amount of people that go missing in the United States alone and Canada, it's a monumental number. And of course, some people just want to disappear, or some people could be murdered. But there are these really unexplained missing situations. Sometimes the body's found, sometimes it's never found. So my point here is I want to believe that there's something good in the universe or in all of consciousness, but my experience tells me that the beings aren't all the same thing. So that like when at the Skinwalker Ranch, some of the one fellow, he found out that he had sort of like a hitchhiker on him, and he went home and he was having all kinds of bad experiences, and even his children were having bad experiences. How do we put that together in Grant Cameron's world? How does Grant Cameron put that together?
Okay, I think that's grade 6. You do this kind of stuff. Okay, let's do Skinwalker Ranch first.
Okay.
And you talk about manifesting. So if you know, I've done a lot of research on Mission Rama. So Mission Rama is the same thing. So the Skinwalker Ranch has the portal, and you have this sort of being coming out of the portal, and it's sort of scary type stuff. And so you've got guys there who are walking around with guns. They're all military people. It's a completely different world. If you get the Mission Rama stuff, and these people, they meditate, they're oming and this sort of stuff, and they're opening these zendras. They call them zendras. There are no mutilated animals. There are no, scary things coming out of portals and stuff like that. And so it may come down to the fact that you sort of manifest what you've got. So the Skinwalker Ranch is a completely different thing than the Mission Rama experiences. There's two different types of people manifesting what's coming out. The whole thing with the evil aliens and the abduction stuff, if you look at the abduction stuff, and that's the hard one to deal with. So you look at and we say, okay, there's evil aliens, as above, so below. Then there are these actual aliens. There's good aliens, and then there's bad aliens, and that's the same on Earth. So then I immediately say, well, which race on Earth is evil? The idea that there are evil races to me is absolute xenophobic racism. It's just crazy idea. I mean, you have in the world, the way the world works to me is it's reincarnation. So you have beings reincarnating over and over again, and they do good things and bad things. So there's been 10,000 cattle mutilations, and we say, this is horrible. Let's let the cows vote on this. Let's let the cows. There's going to be 200 animals a year. Cows are going to be mutilated by aliens. Or if you go with the humans, it's 41.7 million cows a year in the United States that are killed. 9 billion chickens. 4,000 cats a day are euthanized in the United States. And we say, oh, we euthanize them. We're not killing them. We're just euthanizing them. Because then they're objects. We don't really need them. There's too many cats, and we do this kind of stuff. The other thing about the cattle mutilations is if you start to look at what is actually going on, what is really going on, you start to look at Perkins. I can't remember his first name. Perkins says, and he's got one of the biggest catalogs. He's a big cattle mutilation guy. He's got one of the biggest.
David Perkins.
David Perkins. He's got one of the biggest catalogs of cattle mutilations in the world. He says all cattle mutilations happen downwind and downstream from nuclear power activities, accidents, nuclear testing, and stuff like that. You take a look at the NIDS report, said they thought it had to do with mad cow disease, that someone was doing a monitoring program. So you have this monitoring program that somebody's running around, and that's why they take the tongue, that's why they take the genitals and stuff, because these are the new tissues that if you're going to find some sort of contamination in the soil, that's where you're going to find it. The key to the abduction thing is people only tell half the abduction story. So you have whatever it is, whether it's the government that's doing, a lot of people believe it's the government that's doing this monitoring program. I don't believe it is, because when we went in to get bin Laden, we had the best people that we could possibly get, a team in there, and we crashed a helicopter. There's no way you could do 10,000 cattle mutilations and not crash a helicopter and get caught. Right. And you wouldn't be shooting back at the farmers and stuff like that. So I don't believe it's the government, but whoever is doing the thing, a lot of the people who are working on this thing believe that this is some sort of monitoring operation. They're monitoring these cows. The part of the story that people always leave out is the wow factor. So, and I've asked Linda Howe this lots of times, never gotten an answer. I say it's actually 20,000 mutilations. So you have to go in there, you get the cow, you pick up the cow, and then you fly off. You do whatever you're going to do to the cow. And the question is, why do they come back into the war zone? Why do you fly back in, whether you're the government or the aliens, and drop the cow in the front yard of the farmer from 100 feet and drive this thing into the ground? Because they want Linda Howe and Perkins and all these people to take pictures, and they want people to publicize this thing. That's why they dropped the thing. If you're an alien and you need this cow for whatever purpose you're going to do, we eat them and then say they're using it for genetic stuff. why do you come back and drop the cow? It doesn't make any sense. You've got the cow. Go and make it vaporize or put it in the ocean or something like that. They come back. It's the message that they're dropping. That's why with the cats, why would you drop the cat back in the front yard? It's always this messaging thing that there may be a message behind this. It's not that simple. And when you look at the reports that are done, it seems to have something to do with monitoring. And the other thing, when you get this manifesting thing, if you listen to Chris O'Brien, he
Sure.
wrote these 2 big books on cattle mutilations. He says he has yet, and one of the biggest cow breeds in the world is the Brahmin. There has never been a mutilation of a Brahmin. And there's been, and he says 1 out of 20 is reported. So you're talking 200,000 cattle mutilations, according to his stats. Never a single one in the world has been mutilated. And why might that be? Because the Indians consider them to be sacred animals.
Oh.
And so it comes to the idea, we treat them as meat, and we mutilate 41 million a year, we cut them up, and then we eat them. And there's never been and he said he's looked and looked and looked, he's never seen. And he actually says there may be a religious aspect to this whole thing. So cattle mutilations is a hard one to work on, and I'm working on this thing, looking at this thing. So I would say you got to look at the dropping of the cow is the part that everybody always wants to have the thing about what did they take and why would someone do this. We're the good guys. We're killing all these millions. We have a legitimate reason, but they couldn't possibly have a legitimate reason to do this.
Can
and you
I
look at the studies. You have this.
Can I be the devil's advocate here? Only, I don't know. I'm not saying I believe this. I'm saying I really don't know. With the dropping of the cattle back, some people posit that the government does that so that the farmer can get the money and the insurance by giving the body in.
Well, but according to O'Brien, most cattle farmers don't even report them.
Okay.
He figures 1 out of 10 or something, or 1 out of 20 are reporting these things. And the risk is, and this is this thing about the government doing it, where I don't really believe it, is that you're going to go in there. This is 20,000. And you remember when we went to get the Iranian hostages, we crashed all the helicopters.
Mm-hmm.
We had the A-team with the top helicopters and the top people in the world. We crashed a helicopter. What's the chance that you could do this 10,000 cattle mutilations over all these years and get caught? I say simple. You take a look. If this were confirmed that you crashed a helicopter, if it was the government doing this and they crashed a helicopter, can you imagine this story on the front page of the New York Times? The American government mutilated 10,000 cattle and they were shooting at farmers and this sort of stuff. The government falls. There's no way. If you take a look at the guy who ran the bin Laden operation, and his name is Raven is his name. He did a thesis on, I guess a master's thesis on this whole thing. He said you reduce your program to the least risk. There's no way in the world, I think, that the government would do this. The amount of risk of crashing a helicopter and get caught doing this is way beyond. What all you have to do is you say, okay, Chris O'Brien has got 120 cattle, and we need one of his herd. He's going to sell the cow. All you do is get an inside at some guy in the auction house, and when his cow comes through, you just buy it. Why would you go through spending billions of dollars and risk getting caught mutilating people's cows and then dropping them in the front yard to intimidate the thing? And there's all these reports of the shootouts. Why, if you're the American government, why would you be shooting at the farmers? Can you imagine if that story were to break? It was the end of government. There'd be millions of lawsuits, billions of dollars worth of lawsuits, and the government would fall.
I agree with you. I was just being the devil's advocate because I know that we get
that's people. But
letters.
people always bring that up, that they believe this is the government. And I remember Bill Moore, who was famous in the 80s, and he actually had worked for the CIA. He was brought up this thing about, there was one where they found the gas mask, and they found some radar chaff in a cow's mouth. And they said, well, this proves it's the government. And the government may do stuff like that where they want you to think it's the government. But Bill Moore said the same thing. He said, there's no way the CIA would do something. The risk is way too high. All you have to do is go buy the cow. Why would you do this other stupid thing and risk getting caught? Because in the 70s, now and the other thing about cattle mutilations is, I don't care what anybody says, they have basically stopped. You have cattle mutilations in Argentina. But in the 1970s, there was farmers standing out there and they were shooting at anything that moved because they were so furious. There was 70 75, again, is the biggest year of cattle mutilations. It was when I had my sighting, all these things happened in 75. And the risk that you have in going in there, but a lot of people will maintain this is the government. And I say that doesn't make any sense either. But the thing that I always say to people, you have to explain to go to that cattle mutilation is, why are they dropping the cow? Why are they going back in and taking the risk of dropping this cow? And even Linda said, the last time I talked to her, she said, they're taunting us. And that's when I got the idea. I said, that's right. That's what they're doing. They're taunting us. They're basically sending a message, whatever the message is. You're contaminating the world. And you and I may not know why that cow got mutilated, but I can guarantee you someone in the government is going, did you see where that cow ended up? Did you see that? And they know exactly what the contamination is. They know exactly why these things are dropping. Same as, why do they shut down our nuclear missiles? They're sending these messages over and over again, doing these various things, and it's the message. But people get caught in the sort of the eye candy, the mutilated cow, or the story about the missiles being shut down, or the UFOs or the lights on the UFO and stuff like that. We get caught up in these sort of things when in fact the actual story is, what's really going on? What's the message behind who is it, and what are they trying to do? To me, the more I look at it, the more I absolutely think that it's all messaging. That's all they're doing is they're raising consciousness. They're leaving messages. They may be like with experiencers. Why would they show someone a screen? 39% of all experiencers see the screen, where they show this environmental devastation and all these sort of things. Why do they do this? They're putting messages across, and they get this person, and the person carries the message, and it may not be a completely true message or whatever, but they're manipulating people's consciousness. They're moving consciousness, and basically the two major messages are they don't want nuclear weapons, and we are destroying the ecology of the earth. Those are the two main messages, I think, and the message of oneness, that we have to realize we are all one, that we are not, I'm a Canadian, so I'm better than you, and you're an American, you're better than me. We're all one, almost like Reagan said, how the world would unite if we were faced with the threat of an alien invasion. We all realize we're just God's children.
Yes.
That is the bottom line of this thing. We are all one. And with the reincarnation thing, I say to people, if you believe there's evil others out there, if there's a reincarnation thing, what happens if you come back the next life and you're one of those evil beings? Are you then evil for the rest of eternity? To me, it's reincarnating. It's people doing various things. And in every race, there are no evil races. There are just people who are there, and they're based on beliefs. So we would do stupid things. Like, Hitler believed, he had this bizarre belief that the Jews were the problem. And it's based upon a belief. And that's the other thing is knowing versus believing, that experiencers know. They have these experiences where they if you can know anything, it's through experience. But a lot of people are running around with beliefs based upon crazy things, and belief in separation, I believe, causes all evil. As soon as you believe that I'm different than you, animals are just objects, other things, as soon as you believe that you're separate, and that you're not like a cell in the body, you suddenly believe, oh, I'm separate, I can be different, and I want to create, I want to multiply and stuff. Then it becomes like in a human body, a cell that decides it's not part of the one suddenly becomes a cancer cell. It starts duplicating and starts taking over and stuff like that. We all have to realize we're all the same thing. We're parts of a body. Or if you take a look at a beehive and you take a look at the aliens, it's described as a hive mentality. Everybody's sort of doing a job. Everybody's part of one thing that they're doing. It's not like there's no designer clothes. There's no aliens with jewelry. There's none of this kind of stuff. They're all sort of doing something almost like a hive where everybody's working for the good of the one or to do one mission. And we have to realize we're all part of the one, and we came into this world to do something, and all we have to do is figure out what we're doing, and that this idea that there are outside forces who are out to get us or stuff like that. If you have a world of reincarnation, you come in and you may choose to be handicapped. You may choose to be abused. You may choose to do whatever, to experience whatever it is. That if it's a multiple life, then everything becomes experience rather than good and bad. That you can learn from all the bad things that happen to you. In fact, you probably learn more from the bad things that happen to you from the good things, because when you have good things happen to you, you just think, oh man, I'm just so smart, and you go into ego. When your ego is crushed, when you get into bad things, and you suddenly you start to learn, that's when you learn your lessons. So in a reincarnation world, it's all lessons. It's all, and beliefs are what determine what we do. And we've gotten some pretty bizarre beliefs, and I think we're at this turning point in history where they have come in and they are trying to send these messages across to stop before it's too late.
Well, Grant, this has been fabulous. I think that ending with the concept of oneness is a good place for us to pause. And by pause, I mean I'm hoping that you will come back on Shattered Reality, perhaps when Kate is here too. Unfortunately, as mentioned before, she's unable today. And
Yeah.
I'd really like to speak to you more about these things because I share much of your viewpoint. I am mostly not a believer in anything. I proceed from the point of not disbelief, but open belief. In other words, whatever could be is, And
That's what you have to do. That's what you have to do.
So, do you want to mention your latest book, or maybe the Charley RedStar book, and just
Well, my latest book I'll just give you, and then we'll leave it at that.
Okay.
And most of my update material is on my White House UFO YouTube channel. I put out a lot of updates. I do a lot of PowerPoint things where I go through, like the download. I'll go through the whole download experience that I had and stuff like that. But my latest book is Tuned In, the Paranormal World of Creativity, where I got a message from an alien through Chris Bledsoe that the message was in the music, and that it appears that musicians are somehow being used by the others to get messages across. So that's my latest. I do a whole thing on paranormal and music.
Sounds great, Grant. And you have an open invitation to come back and speak with us again. I have great respect for your tenacity in the subject. Like I said, since I was called the second time to get involved around 2004 or so, you have been one of the people I have been following in the field, and I really admire your energy, your tenacity, and I think you're a great guy. So with that, we're going to say goodbye to you from Shattered Reality.
Beautiful.
And I'll speak with you soon.
Beautiful. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was the very interesting, fascinating Grant Cameron, and we do hope to have him back again. And we also hope that by our next show, our co-host, the marvelous Kate Valentine, will also be back. Don't forget to like us on YouTube and on Facebook, and to check us out on our websites, shatteredrealitypodcast.com and shatteredrealitypodcast.wordpress.com. And, give us a comment or write us a note if you would like to be on and give us your experience on our Listener's Corner at the end of the show. We invite you to do so. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye from Shattered Reality.